Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a night to celebrate Gideon's promise and breaking through barriers. I'm Lisa Ling, and in all of my years of reporting on criminal justice issues, I've really seen how far too many people have fallen through the cracks without proper legal representation due to an overwhelmed and understaffed public defender system. And the long-term residual effects brought about by a lack of adequate defense and advocacy is often just so unjust and unequal. And our legal system, it's all just been so devastating to individuals, their loved ones, and their communities.
And I'm Paul Song, a longtime friend and classmate of John Rapping, the founder of Gideon's Promise. I can still recall back to our days in the early 1990s when we were both living in Washington, D.C., where I was in medical school and John was just starting his career as a public defender in the D.C. court system. John, at that time, went above and beyond fighting for his clients and became a mentor and big brother figure to so many that he represented. And I could see how passionate John was about the work he was doing and how much he loved and cared for to his clients, even when they were viewed by many as unlovable. And while our society has always been too quick to abandon and discard our most marginalized citizens, John has always seen value and redemption in everyone. So it was no surprise to me when I first learned of John's vision and goals to establish Gideon's Promise and how it has since become an essential organization to bring about the necessary changes to level a truly unlevel playing field and give true justice for all.
That's right. We are just so grateful that so many of you have taken time away from your busy schedules to celebrate with us tonight. And we recognize this amazing organization, its members, and honor some truly special heroes. So we want you to know that tonight's proceeds go towards providing scholarships for public defenders to receive training, mentorship, and other supportive services from Gideon's Promise, providing supplies and materials for nationwide outreach efforts, and towards maintaining and expanding our law school partnership, a program in which graduating law students from numerous participating law schools are given the necessary funds to be placed in public defenders' offices across the country as fellows.
So welcome again, and let's all have a great time. And now we would like you to all raise your glass as we toast Gideon's Promise, tonight's honorees, event sponsors, supporters, and donors. Together we can bring about equal justice for all.
Excuse our glasses.
Cheers.
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 I was introduced, fortunately, to John and Illy, who set up Gideon's Promise 13 years ago. And I've educated myself over the past few months about the work they do. Essentially, what they do is to help support the amazing public defenders. And I'd like to thank everyone from Gideon's Promise to these amazing public defenders for all the important work you're doing.
We need public defenders to keep us out of jail, to keep us out of the system. And, you know, it always resonated with me. I mean, it hits so close to home.
First of all, there's nothing little about y'all because, like you said, this is about community. You know what I mean? All of us are intertwined. All of us are connected. In order for us to be what we say we want to be as a society, we all got to have this kind of synergy.
80% of individuals who enter into our criminal justice system are relying upon a public defender. I want to say it again, it's 80%. I mean, that is a incredible amount.
It's not just about transforming public defense, but all administrators of justice, prosecutors, police officers. It is changing the culture, changing the narrative about economically disadvantaged people.
Violence in the street that's happening to Black and brown people every day. There is an invisible violence happening in the courtrooms every day, a violence that happens when cell phones aren't recording, when CNN isn't there, when YouTube's not on. And it's a violence that happens to poor people when they're housed in jails pre-trial because they can't afford bond, when they're over-sentenced, over-prosecuted. And really, public defenders are the only people there to interrupt that routine, invisible violence.
So I would encourage other public defenders, you may not have to have my advocacy style, but if you hear something, say something. How else can this continual system of locking people in cages, how can there be a cog in the wheel unless we open up our mouths and be an amplification for our clients?
So for somebody to take lesser to actually go in there to, fight for you, that says a lot. And I came from a place where we didn't have any fight when it came to the judicial system, the county chair, the office. These people, like, you would just hit. If you got them handcuffs on you, you got to deal with it. So to see, fast forward to the date of 2020, to say we actually have a front line, and you actually have people out there that are fighting for you. And when you tell me you guys went from 6 lawyers to over 1,000, that's at least 1,000 times a day that somebody has a fighting chance.
My name is Rochelle Yankwit, and I had the great fortune to be married to Ian Yankwit for 22 years. Ian passed away November 5th of last year, and in his memory, family and friends have donated or pledged over $600,000 to the Ian Yankwit Memorial Fund at Gideon's Promise. I want to thank everyone who contributed in Ian's memory. The amount is humbling. It fully covers the cost of 30 public defenders' participation in the 3-year Gideon's Promise Core 101 program and outreach opportunities. 30 more public defenders facing tough decisions and carrying heavy caseloads will have the support of Gideon's Promise, helping more of them to stay the course in a very challenging and desperately needed role. Ian would be thrilled by how much is going to Gideon's Promise, and both honored and embarrassed that it was raised in his name. I want to give some insight into why Ian inspired people to contribute so generously. Obviously, I'm biased here, but Ian Yankwit was a uniquely gifted and generous man. He was a public defender for about 6 years. In the course of a life's work, not a very long time, but the underlying qualities of the public defender, fighting for the underdog, allowing the little guy a fair shake in the fight, keeping the system honest, these were qualities Ian embodied and that I loved and respected in him. He was one of the good guys. But life took its turns, and ultimately Ian started his business, Tortoise Investment Management, a wealth management firm. So how exactly does one go from being a public defender to a wealth manager, you might ask? The answer in Ian's case is straightforward. You continue doing what you do best. Ian had a rare talent in talking to people about difficult things, and they trusted him. His intellect, his willingness to listen without judging, and his ability to advise. Ian was the person everyone wanted by their side, talking them through the major decisions in their lives. Do I plead guilty? Do I testify? How can I plead guilty with my wife in the courtroom? Can I afford to take this job? Can I afford to not take this job? Can I afford to help my adult child financially? Should I help my adult child financially? And even, how do I tell my child I've decided not to help? How do I go forward from this place? The ability to guide, counsel, encourage, console, these aren't just techniques you learn in a weekend training class. That was a lifetime of being Ian, being the person who everyone turned to when they had a problem, an opportunity, a situation requiring judgment. He was the guy. He had the ability to take in the full picture, condense it into a set of understandable principles, a way of looking at it that made sense without being overwhelming. Ian masterfully used storytelling, stories from his own life, from history and literature, from others' experiences, to give meaning and context to his advice. He would walk you step by step from your current understanding or state of confusion to the conclusion you needed to reach, without ever making you feel talked down to or belittled. You walked side by side on this journey. That was Ian's gift, And it's the thing his many, many, many friends tell me every day that they miss. I wish I could talk to Ian about this. When Ian was introduced to Gideon's Promise, it reconnected him to a missing part of himself, a link back to the public defender world. He was so happy to touch that realm again, and so proud to be asked to join the advisory board of Gideon's Promise. Unfortunately, not long after his appointment to that position, we learned that Ian's cancer was terminal and his time in the role was too brief. The Yankwit family's continuing connection to and support for Gideon's Promise is an honor and a blessing in remembering Ian. I was privileged to be the person at Ian's side every day and to be the one to see him off from this world. May you all have the opportunity to walk beside an Ian at some point in your lives.
I wish I could say it's nice to see everyone, but it's nice to know that so many friends and supporters of Gideon's Promise are out there. I'm David Patton. I'm the federal defender in New York City. More importantly, for this event, I'm a longtime Gideon's Promise faculty member and a member of the board of directors, and I just want to give a heartfelt thanks to all of you for joining. My role here is really a treat for me, which is I get the honor of presenting the inaugural Ian Yankwit Equalizer Award, which is being presented to my great friend, Sean Hecker. And I just want to take a couple minutes to talk about why there really is no more perfect fit for the first ever Ian Yankwit Equalizer Award than Sean. As many of you may know from previous Gideon's Promise events, there's always been an Equalizer Award, and Sean certainly fits that part of it. He's been a career-long criminal defense lawyer. He was a public defender here at Federal Defenders. In fact, he and Ian and I were all colleagues together. He co-founded just an amazing law firm, Kaplan, Hecker, and Fink, where he is now, and it dedicates an enormous amount of time pro bono to all sorts of amazing causes, including representing now the Federal Defenders of New York in our years-long litigation against the Bureau of Prisons, trying to get humane access to lawyers despite all of the miserable conditions in our local jails. So Sean is not somebody who just cheerleads from the sidelines. He's fully engaged in the work that Gideon's Promise celebrates. So that's the equalizer piece. But as I think you probably got a sense from Rochelle's talk, what makes this a truly perfect fit and really quite special this evening is the Ian part of it. This is the first time it has been named in his honor. Sean and I were good friends of Ian's. A few months before Ian passed away, Sean and I went up to visit him at his home, and we sat with him at his bedside. And it was just a really wonderful afternoon. Ian, despite all that he was going through, was his usual gregarious self and engaged as ever. And we talked about all the same stuff that we always talked about, latest TV shows or books or what was going on in the world, politics, gambling, sometimes politics and gambling together. Sean and Ian were talking about Predict It, this online odds making site about which politicians were likely to be elected, where the smart money was going. I raise this because Sean and Ian shared so many of the same interests and the same sensibility about the world. Sean believes, Ian believed, that pushing for good public policy and insisting on humane treatment and fair process was not just some feel-good do-gooderism. It didn't come just from that place. It came from a sense that it was the smart thing to do, that we are all in this together, that supporting the values of humane treatment of our fellow citizens makes us all individually better, makes us a better society. It just plain makes good sense. And it was offensive to Ian that our system operates as cruelly as it does. That came from deeply rooted values that he held. But it was especially offensive to him that it was both cruel and mindless, that it was dumb and counterproductive. And I know Sean shares those same values. He's committed to a set of humane values that are rooted both in compassion and thoughtfulness. And throughout his career, Sean has walked the walk. He has lived those values, and that is why he really is the perfect recipient of the inaugural Ian Yankwit Equalizer Award. Sean, my friend, congratulations. This is a treat for me to be able to introduce you like this.
Thank you, David. I don't know if you're able to see me, but hopefully you can hear me. I really appreciate the too generous introduction. It's great to have a friend like David introduce you, to say all those nice things. It's a little dangerous to have to speak after David Patton. Let me just say this. I cried when I learned that I would be receiving this award. I tend to be a little quick with the waterworks. I rarely make it through a sentencing with a client without tearing up, but this was different. See, I loved Ian Yankwit, and I miss him dearly. It makes me incredibly proud to have my name on a Gideon's Promise Award named after him. And I want to thank Rochelle and the Yankwit family for agreeing to bestow the award on me. I first met Ian when I was in law school interviewing for a summer associate job, and Ian was working at a big fancy New York law firm. We argued for years afterward about whether he was really wearing a Mickey Mouse tie during the interview. He wouldn't deny that he had a poster of dogs playing poker on his wall. That had happened, but he really took issue with the tie. We all know that biases creep into human memory, but let's just say it was clear to me that he was a bit of a fish out of water in that environment. We spent the interview talking about a death penalty case that he was working on and seemed to be spending most of his time on. And so it was no surprise when I learned shortly thereafter that Ian had gone on to become a federal public defender, as you just heard. And fast forward a number of years, I think 7 years later in 2003, and I too began working as a federal public defender with David and Ian. And believe it or not, I inherited Ian's docket as Ian was about to leave to start Tortoise. And I remember being handed the 20 some odd files. And I know for those public defenders out there, 20 might not seem like a lot, but it was just my first day. And let's just say you should never judge a book by its cover. In this context, you wouldn't have wanted to make any judgments about Ian's lawyering skills from looking in those files because they were close to empty. Sure, they had a charging document in there, maybe a plea offer. If there was an inch of paper discovery in those days, that would have been a lot. But you wouldn't have been able to figure out in the file when Ian had actually gone to court or met with a client or what had happened. That Ian kept in his head. Now, I want to be clear about this. Ian was always 100% prepared. He was a brilliant lawyer and strategist, and nothing made him prouder than using his huge brain, his remarkable gift of gab, and his unbelievable compassion for getting great results from his clients. He was an amazing trial lawyer. He did that over and over again, getting amazing results for clients. He just kept a lot in his head. And so I had to spend a lot of time with Ian figuring out what was happening in each of these cases. And I remember the first time that I went with Ian to the prison in Manhattan, the Metropolitan Correctional Center. Now, no one has said this, but Ian was a big man, not tall, but he was big, like high school wrestler and football big. And I remember drafting behind him as we walked in to the MCC for the first time to meet my first client who was incarcerated. And I remember her well. She had been working at an art dealership, and she was supposed to be keeping the books, but in fact, she was skimming from them. And my recollection is there wasn't much to the case in terms of strategy. We were fortunate that we were in front of a great judge, a kind judge, and all we were talking to the client about was needing to go in and plead guilty and really beg for mercy. But what made it special was that Ian stood beside me as I met my first client. He stood beside me as he introduced me to Judge Buchwald in that first plea. And he stood beside me, tears in my eyes, as I begged to the judge that for a sentence of time served for this woman who really didn't need more time in federal prison to learn her lesson. The judge did the right thing. But what made it loom large for me 18 years later was having Ian by my side. As you heard from Rochelle, improbably, Ian went on to start an investment management firm, and I entrusted my own financial planning to Ian. I literally referred everyone I knew to Ian. My pitch was always the same. Ian's one of the smartest people I know. I don't know anybody more trustworthy. He'll make your problems his problems to solve. And what more could you want in a financial advisor, or really in a friend? I've said a lot about Ian. He was a really important person in my life, and that's why I miss him. But I want to talk about Gideon's Promise because Ian and I shared a deep love and respect for the work of Gideon's Promise. Part of that was our shared love and respect for David Patton, who contributed a lot of money at poker tables over the years to Ian and me at our respective homes. So it seemed fitting and fair that we ought to contribute some money back to one of David's favorite non-profit defender organizations. But more seriously, it was the case that for each of us, for Ian and for me, we had long since, we'd had the days of being a public defender long in our past, but we really remained public defenders at heart. And in a country that continues to face a mass incarceration crisis, in a country where the tide seems to be turning again against some kind of systemic reform, there is no better cause to support than an organization dedicated to ensuring that public defenders across the country have all the tools and skills they need to be effective every day, case by case, client by client, to fight for justice one person at a time. And Gideon's Promise is led by one of the most inspiring leaders I know in rap, who I'm really honored to know. If you haven't written a fat check yet, please do so. It will go to an important cause, never more important than now. It will honor Ian's memory, and it'll do more justice. And finally, let me just say what a thrill it is for me to share even a virtual stage with my dear friend, Christina Swarns of the Innocence Project. Christina is a criminal justice reform all-star, and she's one of the classiest, smartest, kindest people I know. So I want to congratulate Christina. I'm honored to be honored with you. And I want to thank Gideon's Promise for honoring me tonight. And again, thank the Yankwit family. I will always strive to remain a deserving recipient of the Ian Yankwit Equalizer Award.
My name is Zubin Abraham Ahmed. I am a senior political science major, criminal justice and leadership studies minor from Seattle, Washington, currently at Morehouse College. And I'm actually an intern at the famed advancement department of Gideon's Promise in Atlanta as well. So I'd like to present a poem of mine that seeks to encapsulate really the intricacies of change from a more abstract perspective. It's titled Just Showers. I imagine a question one must ask themselves on a near daily basis seeks to answer as a counter to such a culminating stasis. how change is brought, reckoned, and seen. Many of the times when I've asked this, I felt a different atmosphere start to sprinkle and muster, rearing a classic metaphor of precipitation, one that can't help but fluster. It is in this change can be sought, at least exemplified as something, alongside clouds raining on complacency, showing what they have fought. It is from this, at first, just one, not heard, not seen, just barely felt, usually regarded as needing no closer inspection as it rolls off each and every back with a microscopic reflection. Another follows after, rendering the first to be more than forgotten from the top. This initial skepticism is exactly what yielded the canyons that had been bored by each falling drop. And another follows after that, bringing the brave few forward, reckoning the rest to come. And before anyone expects, a movement is formed. Sheets of pouring rain ripple across every crook and cranny in the concrete. It is in this that justice washes the world. It is in this that victory is declared. To the sky, every fist is hurled. A constant is not just felt. It is seen. It is heard. It is brought. We know it is always sought with a rallying call. The people's reign changes all. Thank you. As a poet and activist, I truly appreciate any opportunity to share my art, but I especially appreciate this opportunity and being able to share my art with everybody here. So, thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm happy to be here. My name is David Rudofsky. I'm a civil rights lawyer in Philadelphia, and I have the distinct honor of introducing Christina Swans, who is going to receive the Champion of Community Award from Gideon's Promise. I say that sincerely in terms of both the privilege and honor of giving this award or introducing Christina to you. She is, as you know, a leading lawyer for the past 30 years in the fight for equal racial justice, the fight for an independent criminal defense bar, and for zealous advocacy by public defenders. The arc of her career reflects her commitment, her moral values, a moral compass that literally is stuck on justice. She has done it all in 30 years. She started as a criminal defense lawyer with the Legal Aid Society in New York. She has been the head of the appellate division in New York State. She has been a leading advocate at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, civil rights litigation, and she is currently the executive director of the Innocence Movement. In addition, for a period of time in Philadelphia, she was my student at Penn Law some 30 years ago, and I knew from that time, when I met her there, and have been a colleague with her since then, that her promise, her skills, and her devotion would serve the fight for justice. Her work in Philadelphia, for example, was exemplary. She was a staff lawyer and then a supervising lawyer at the Capital Habeas Unit of the Federal Public Defender in Philadelphia, leading the charge on death penalty litigation, a Capital Habeas Unit that over the past 20 years has gotten reversals of sentences or convictions in over 100 capital cases in Pennsylvania, both in state post-conviction and in federal habeas, and Christina was part of that movement. As you know, just recently, she's been named executive director of the Innocence Project. She's seen the system from every angle and from every level. She started, as I said, as a trial lawyer. She was in the trenches. She's gone from arguing bail motions, discovery motions, trials in criminal court, to appellate work in New York State, to death penalty litigation with the Capital Habeas Unit, to arguing in the Supreme Court. Her argument in Buck versus Davis just 2 years ago or 3 years ago was exemplary in terms of the issue that was presented and why it ever took so many years to get justice for her client, who was the victim of racially biased evidence at the capital sentencing phase in his case. It's a remarkable indictment of our system that it took so long and so many courts rejecting that claim. For years, she's been faithful to these promises, and she's been most faithful to the promises of Gideon's Promise. Her work has always been in terms of criminal justice reform and the need for strong advocacy on the defense side. She has done that. She's done it repeatedly, and she's worked on every angle and every intersection of criminal justice. As we know, the work of the Innocence Project is extremely important, not only in the remarkable fact of the hundreds of exonerations that they've been able to achieve of innocent people after serving many, many years in prison, some on death row, but also what my friend Abby Smith calls the Guilty Project. As public defenders, I started as a public defender. I was a public defender in Philadelphia for 5 years. I was then back as first assistant. I was head of the board of the Philadelphia Public Defender Office. We all know that our work is not usually a case of vindicating innocence. It's getting fundamental fairness for clients who are otherwise denied fair process and equal protection. And to be sure, even in systems like we have now in Philadelphia with the progressive district attorney, Larry Krasner, and sometimes, as we know, decent judges who try to do the right thing in a fairly corrupt system with mass incarceration, unless we have strong advocates on the defense side, we simply won't have equal justice. This Champion of Community Award could not go to a more deserving person. Christina has fought the fight for 30 years. She'll continue to fight those issues and try to bring the basic promises of our system and our Constitution to clients all across the country. So again, it's my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce Christina Swarns, this year's recipient of the Champion of Community Award from Gideon's Promise.
Thank you so much, David. It is an honor to be honored by Gideon's Promise, to share the stage with my friend Sean Hecker and my friend David Patton, and so many other of the people that I admire so much in this community. I have to start by just saying there really are no words to convey how proud I am to receive the Champion of the Community Award from Gideon's Promise. It's an honor to be recognized for my work with and on behalf of the extraordinary community of public and indigent defenders. This is truly my village, and I know that I am incredibly lucky to have found it. You know, I was not the kid that knew exactly what she wanted to do when she grew up. I was born into a deeply political family, but I was raised in a racially segregated and politically conservative community. That means, quoting Dr. Eddie Glaude from Princeton, that I had the privilege of growing up in a tradition that didn't believe in the myths and the legends because we had to bear the brunt of them. It also meant that I understood, again quoting Dr. Glaude, that achieving equal justice will require us to look ourselves squarely in the face in great pain and terror and do the work of actually achieving our country. I eventually decided that I would become a lawyer to change the world, but I really didn't have any idea how. I went through law school trying a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but nothing stuck. It wasn't until after I graduated from Penn Law School, about 6 months later, that I found my home. I was amazed to find a universe of lawyers who, day in and day out, said the thoughts that were in my head out loud. And not just to each other, but to judges, to prosecutors, to police officers, and anyone else that would listen. You know, for the first time, I saw that I could make a career of confronting and critiquing the status quo on behalf of the most marginalized and despised communities, on behalf of my own community. So I was all in, and I have stayed all in for the entirety of my career. The people I have had the privilege of representing and the lawyers with whom I have worked taught me more lessons about the transformative power of bearing witness and of speaking truth to power than I can ever count. Tonight, I'll just touch on two of those examples. The first lesson comes from my very first supervisor, an extraordinary trial lawyer that many of you know, Tom Klein, who now works for the Bronx Defenders. For many years, Tom kept a tiny scrap of paper tacked to the bulletin board in his office that said, "Get Guy out." This little scrap of paper served as a constant reminder to him and to us that as easy and as tempting as it is to do so, we cannot look away. We have to focus on every single client, no matter how egregious the facts and no matter how extensive the record. More than one Innocence Project client can attest to the urgency of that need. The second lesson comes from Gene McKissick, a longtime solo practitioner in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. He was the first Black prosecutor in his county, and he later served as a contract public defender. Mr. McKissick testified as a defense witness in a death penalty case I litigated when I was at LDF. Notwithstanding the very real risk to his practice, Mr. McKissick explained that Black people in his community were afraid to come to the courthouse. They were afraid of, quote, displeasing the white power structure, that they believed, and I'm quoting him again, that the courthouse was not a safe place for a Black man to be. Mr. McKissick testified from his experience as being a prosecutor. He explained that the prosecutors there sought Black jurors, and I quote him, that were used to taking orders from white people. His extraordinarily brave witness caused a judge to recuse himself and unquestionably contributed to the ultimate grant of sentencing relief in that case. He exemplifies the ways in which public and indigent defenders not only step in, they throw themselves in front of the train to keep our clients from bearing the brunt of the system. The lessons I took from Tom Klein and Gene McKissick converged in the Dwayne Buck case. We took that case on at LDF after the Supreme Court denied Mr. Buck's cert petition in 2011. We had every reason not to take the case. He had exhausted his appeals. He was out of court. He was going to get a death warrant. We did not have a clearly viable claim, and we were not likely to make law. But we kept our focus on two things. First, Mr. Buck, and second, the racism that we knew unequivocally infected his death sentence. Over our time litigating that case, we deflected the invitations to refocus the case on the procedural questions, and instead, we insisted that the court look at the racism infecting Mr. Buck's death sentence. And as you know, our focus on that case, our focus on our client made all the difference, as Chief Justice John Roberts ultimately issued an opinion not only vacating Mr. Buck's death sentence, but also declaring unequivocally that the law punishes people for what they do and not who they are. Today, I carry everything I learned from my public defender colleagues with me in my leadership of the Innocence Project, where we scrutinize requests for representation and achieve exonerations in seemingly impossible cases. We acknowledge the pervasive role of racism in wrongful conviction, and we fight for structural and systemic reform that helps everyone. I wouldn't be who I am today or where I am today without my village, this village of public and indigent defenders. And our country and our legal system is so much better for the extraordinary work of the army of brilliant Gideon's Promise lawyers. I am so grateful for the honor of this recognition this evening, and I thank you so much for this award.
Hey there, it's Deron Harmon here, and on behalf of the National Football League and the Atlanta Falcons, we are here to emphasize how public defenders play an important role in providing voices for the voiceless in our poverty-driven communities across the nation. These are the same people who cheer for us week in and week out, but also rely heavily on public defenders in their closing arguments. While an NFL player and a public defender's job description might be completely different, one thing I know is that we were both put on this earth to provide hope for the people who need it the most. It means a lot to me that you guys decided to participate in this event because you too know that change needs to happen, and it's up to us to make it happen. Please join the NFL in its support of Gideon's Promise, as they are the force to make change happen.
I woke up one day and everything about how I did my job had changed. At first, the courts had shut down for a week. Then it was 2. And finally, by the end of the first week, the court had announced that they were going to close down indefinitely. All the hearings were postponed or canceled. You couldn't get your clients out of jail. And most times you couldn't even visit your clients in the jail. And what was most heartbreaking was when I finally was able to visit my clients in the jail, having to write an email to the DA for a dismissal because my client had died in the jail. And at this time, no one had any answers. And I personally felt alone, inept, powerless, and I was losing hope. And partly because the pandemic is so hard for so many, but partly it was my fault. I had gotten away from my roots. I'd forgotten how my roots had grounded me and fortified me to weather this storm. See, if there's anything that I learned from Gideon's Promise, it's that you're not alone and you don't have to do it all by yourself. And once you join Gideon's Promise, you become part of a community, a network of roots that stands firmly planted together to support each other in the fight against injustice and inequality, in the fight against prejudice and racism, in the fight against the idea it's okay to hurl, millions of people into cages and strip them from their humanity. So when no one had any answers, I started getting emails every day from public defenders across the country in the same situation I was in. And they would say, hey, check out this motion for pretrial release. I had some success in my jurisdiction. Maybe this can work for you. And let me know if there's anything else I can do. And before I knew it, clients stopped dying. Not everyone, but a considerable amount. What a coincidence it is when well-trained public defenders put their heads together to inject some humanity into the justice system. People stop dying. What a difference it makes when public defenders in unison start treating bond hearings like a life and death situation it is. People stop dying. And I know what some might think. COVID was a storm that opened up everyone's eyes to empathy, that we've all been hit with some measure of adversity, a measure of loss, a measure of pain. And in this storm, you can finally see my clients' humanity, but that just simply wasn't the case. Things didn't get easier. DAs and judges didn't get more forgiving. We as public defenders just got stronger and more resilient. When the storm came, we didn't run from the storm. We didn't try to go around the storm. We went through the storm, standing next to our clients, right? With our roots firmly planted, embedded into the soil, holding strong, and fought through that storm. And that's what it means to be a public defender, fortified and grounded by your roots. I guess my advice is that we don't stray from the storm. We don't run when things get hard. We fall back on our roots. What you go through,
you will grow through. And we're going to have days where we make mistakes, when we screw up, when we fail, yes. And we're going to have bad days where it seems like everyone and everything is against you and your client. But then we remember that we have roots. All the people that are here to support you and fight by your side. And when you have that, there will be no days that you will give up, where you will give in. There's not going to be any days that you throw in the towel and you can see defeat. I promise that you will look up and you will see that the storm has passed and you are still there. And all that is to say that as I commend the great work that we're celebrating here today, but I also encourage us to all still stand together in the storm so that we have something to celebrate tomorrow. Thank you.
I am Ilham Askia, and this is Jonathan Rapping. We are the co-founders of Gideon's Promise. I am so happy that you joined us this evening. And I am grateful, and Rapp and I are grateful to you for the support you have given our public defenders and the people that they serve as we near the end of another unexpected year of challenges. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that our community will continue to do the important work of providing zealous advocacy to people directly impacted by the criminal legal system. Because of your support, for everyone out there in social media, because of your support, we're able to keep our public defenders together, to keep them encouraged, to keep them going, and like John said, weather the storm.
So, you know, we've come a long way, and tonight reminds me of how far we've come. 14 years ago, when we would do events, Ilya and I would each speak for 15 minutes. We were lucky if we could get one person who someone outside of the public defender community knew come to join us. And now tonight, our advancement team reaches out to us and says, hey guys, you have 3 minutes. That's it, no more than 3 minutes. And it's wonderful because there are so many people connected to this community who have so much to say. And I just want to thank you. I want to thank the people who are doing this work every day, who are fighting for justice every day, who joined us tonight. I want to thank the public defenders and all of the other first responders who have really stood up during this pandemic. And I just want to end by saying these last 18 months have been so hard. They've been hard for all of us, but public defenders who have a hard job, even under normal circumstances, it wasn't clear how they would be able to survive watching such terrible things happen to the people they represent and love. And we weren't sure if we'd be able to give them the support they needed. And 18 months later, we look back and we see people like John Allicock and so many hundreds of public defenders like him that give us hope. And we have been able to continue to support them through this pandemic so they could support the people in the communities who are really bearing the brunt of injustice. And we could only do it because of all of you. So thank you so much. We're grateful to you. And thanks for joining us.
Congratulations to our honorees. Thank you, Lisa Ling and Paul Song, all of our very, very generous sponsors, and a special thanks to Rochelle and the Yankowitz family. We look forward to seeing everyone again and hopefully live next year. Good night and take care.
Good night.
We hope you'll consider supporting this amazing organization and the transformative work by going to www.gideonspromise.org and making a donation. Our public defenders and far too many disadvantaged communities nationwide depend on your support. You can also email advancement@gideonspromise.org with any questions you may have. And above all, let's do our best to magnify the tremendous work of Gideon's Promise to ensure that we can truly achieve equal justice for all. gmail.com.